Good evening. Thanks for joining us. I'm Rob Johnson.
And I'm Kate Sullivan. Tonight, a legal bombshell. You'll only see it on CBS 2. It's what the Lake County coroner calls newly discovered X-ray scans.
Those X-rays of the skull of little Benjamin Kingen could reportedly be critical in the defense of a woman sitting behind bars for his death. CBS 2's Brad Edwards live at the Lake County coroner's office with this original report. Brad.
Good evening, Rob and Kate. A young woman convicted and now imprisoned for murder. Now, these two slides may not only prove her innocence, but show a crime was never committed. To be clear, these have not been seen publicly before.
That is correct.
New coroner Dr. Thomas Rudd. These may be the linchpin in a conviction in question. Maybe Melissa Kalyasinski's key to freedom, convicted of murder for fracturing a toddler's skull.
Why don't I see it here?
Kalyasinski was grilled by Lake County investigators in 2009.
Did somebody intentionally hurt him?
Yeah, I would never put my hands on it, ever. I've never put my hand on the child, ever. I've never taken my eyes off of those kids.
79 times Kalyasinski, with a low verbal IQ, denied harming 16-month-old Ben Kingen. Then in the 9th hour of interrogation.
Okay. So I got angry, and I went boom.
Her conviction is based on wrong evidence.
It was said the child suffered a skull fracture tantamount to a 2-story fall. The X-ray evidence at first, the milky ones on the left, indiscernible. Then an anonymous tip led to new scans, still in the system, on the right.
We should see a gray space like this in a line form right here.
No fracture.
No fracture.
No fracture on the skull, and as for that fall, no other breaks. And you don't see any?
None whatsoever. Completely normal.
The doctor says it was clearly a pre-existing head injury, something the parents saw a doctor about weeks before the alleged incident.
You say definitively no skull fracture.
Correct.
Yet someone sits in prison still convicted of murder.
That's correct. And she shouldn't be.
Are you going to change the manner of death?
I'm considering it.
That, changing the manner of death, potentially making it not a homicide. We reached out to the state's attorneys here after office hours. They told us since the case is already going through an ongoing post-conviction review, they're unable to comment. We're live tonight in Waukegan. Brad Edwards, CBS 2 News. Robert Kate.
They're unable to comment, Brad, but if the coroner changes the manner of death, what is Kalyasinski's future?
Well, it still will be ultimately up to the court. It would be one more salvo, including all of those, the re-review of that initial admission of guilt. It would just be another tentacle in what will surely be an entangled court process. Rob?
All right. Thanks so much, Brad.
Right now, a story you'll only see here on CBS 2.
So I got angry, and I went boom.
How could you ever admit to something?
What they do to you in there, it's a nightmare. A daycare provider with a low verbal IQ confesses to killing a toddler in her care.
In this original report, Brad Edwards speaks to Melissa Kalyasinski inside prison. She says she didn't do it, and science may back her up.
After the years have passed, it's been just so overwhelming. I get sad when I think about him.
Him, 16-month-old Ben Kingen. Melissa Kalyasinski was convicted of murdering him. She confessed.
I'll never forget that interrogation.
So I got angry, and I went boom.
The most damning piece of evidence against you. You threw the baby down.
Yes. In the video.
Why'd you do that?
They were saying those exact words and doing the same hand gestures.
How could you ever admit to something?
What they do to you in there, it's a nightmare.
After 79 denials,
I never disciplined him. Never. I'll even take a lie detector to that.
she confessed 6 hours into the interrogation. Do you remember the feeling of being in that room?
I do.
What did you feel?
Scared. The only way for me to get out of there was basically what they wanted.
Do you blame someone for this?
Mostly blame myself. I wish I was stronger.
What brought us here, 7 years after Ben Kingan's death, new coroner Dr. Tom Rudd discovered x-rays showing no skull fracture and says a previous head injury caused his skull to enlarge at an alarming rate. September 2008, head size in the 50th percentile. December 2008, the 75th percentile. And January 15th, 2009, the 95th percentile. That the day after he died.
When did you know something was desperately wrong?
The minute I called for his name. From a distance, he was pale white.
Have you ever done anything violent?
Never.
Ever?
Never.
Did you ever strike him?
No.
Prosecutors contend Kingan may have had a prior injury, but Kalyasinski delivered the final blow. The coroner disagrees, citing no skull fracture. He changed Ben Kingan's cause of death from homicide to undetermined.
Were you hoping you'd be out by now?
Yes.
What do you miss most about home?
Everything.
At night in prison, where she keeps to herself.
I say a prayer for my family.
And she cries, she says.
I do it where no one can see me. Sometimes at night I cry myself to sleep.
And the next hearing in the case is scheduled for March. So far, the state's attorney's office has fought Kalyasinski's efforts for a new trial. The prosecutor and police declined comment. Kalyasinski is now represented by Kathleen Zellner, a lightning rod, who successfully helped overturn numerous murder convictions. She's also currently representing Stephen Avery of Making a Murderer renown. Rob and Erica?
I know what the family's hoping for. Is this story likely to shed any light that would make a difference when it comes to the state's attorney addressing the issues that the coroner has brought forth?
Yeah, I think the family is ultimately hoping for some relief, just another shot, another trial. I think they're hoping for some type of snowball effect. But the state's attorney has apparently dug in and is going to fight at every angle to have this not be retried.
All right. Fascinating story, Brad.
Yes.
Thanks.
Tonight, we're back in prison in the case of the daycare worker convicted of killing a toddler. She claims her innocence despite her own confession. So what did happen? CBS 2's Brad Edwards reveals important information that could shed new light on the death of Ben Kingan.
Behind barbed wires in central Illinois' Logan Correctional, a life Melissa Kalyasinski never expected. A bleak chapter began here.
You have the right to talk with a lawyer.
Kalyasinski, with a low verbal IQ, never asked for a lawyer.
Did you grab his feet and slam his head in the ground in any way?
The daycare worker quizzed about little Ben Kingan, a toddler who died on her watch.
And when I had him, I was like this.
Kalyasinski says she was putting Ben down close to the ground on his tiptoes.
So I thought he was going to stand.
She said he fell and hit his head. New coroner Dr. Tom Rudd told me today a simple bump of his head, quote, was likely the terminal event, an accident. An accident because he already had a pre-existing head injury, Dr. Rudd determined. Yet it was this.
Okay. So I got angry.
Yeah.
And I went boom.
After dozens of denials, 6 hours into the interrogation, Kalyasinski confessed to, lower right, Detective George Falenko. Do you remember Detective Falenko?
Oh, yes.
Falenko, you recall, headed the confounding investigation into the suicide of Fox Lake Lieutenant G.I. Joe Glenowitz, an investigation in which he lambasted Coroner Rudd for floating the specter of suicide, later found true. He was already at odds with Rudd for changing the manner of death in the Kingan case from homicide to undetermined, a case where Falenko won a confession.
You can't weasel out of everything by manipulating facts.
What would you say to George Falenko if you saw him?
He made a mistake.
And science may agree.
You're doing the right thing here.
Brad Edwards, CBS 2 News.
A hearing in the case is scheduled for March. So far, the state's attorney's office has fought Kalyasinski's efforts for a new trial. The state's attorney's office, Detective Falenko, and Ben Kingan's family had no comment.
The top investigator in the G.I. Joe suicide case in Fox Lake has resigned. Commander George Falenko, the most powerful man in Lake County crime, is stepping down from his front and center role. This 1 week after our story digging into Falenko's interrogation techniques. CBS 2's Brad Edwards has more from Waukegan.
I had always set a benchmark, which was my 60th birthday, to retire from the task force or leave the task force. And I turned 60 this past weekend.
Chief George Falenko told our Roseanne Tellez, quote, Chief Falenko handled some of the most complicated and gut-wrenching cases that we have had, end quote, said Lake County State's Attorney Mike Neerheim. Another glowing release said Falenko was, quote, involved in over 200 homicide investigations, including some of the toughest and most scrutinized cases not only in Lake County and Illinois, but nationwide, said with an exclamation point.
The most difficult part of that was to hit the send key.
His resignation letter. It's to spend more time with his family, Falenko said. Paul Kalyasinski misses his family, his daughter.
She needs to be home. She didn't do this. He's doing the right thing by stepping down.
His daughter, imprisoned for years in a questionable confession. Recent evidence shows the little boy that died in her care didn't die from a skull fracture, but a pre-existing injury. Melissa Kalyasinski had a low verbal IQ. After 79 denials, after 6 hours, she confessed to Falenko. 1 week ago this night, we did this story.
You can't weasel out of everything by manipulating facts.
What would you say to George Falenko if you saw him?
He made a mistake.
And science may agree.
You're doing the right thing here.
In the end, Falenko says he has no regrets. He'll keep his job and title as police chief in Round Lake. Live in Waukegan tonight, Brad Edwards, CBS 2 News. Rob?
Brad, what do you think the Glinowitz investigation had to do with Falenko's decision?
Well, he would say nothing, but certainly that had to have taken a toll. A lot of scrutiny, and looking back on it from nearly day one, all signs pointed to suicide. But George Falenko was a man who was in charge, always controlled the narrative here on major crime stories, and he was the one that finally, 2 months later, said, indeed, it was a suicide. So it had to have certainly taken a toll, though, Rob.
All right, fair enough, Brad. Thank you.